Americanism was a group of related views among American Catholics, denounced as heresies by the Vatican, because they tended to endorse the separation of church and state and encourage individualistic thinking. European continental conservative clerics thought they detected signs of modernism, a classical liberalism of the sort the Pope had condemned in the Syllabus of Errors in 1864. They feared that these doctrines were held by and taught by many members of the Catholic hierarchy in the United States in the 1890s. Catholic leaders in the U.S., however, denied that they held these views. Pope Leo XIII read against these ideas in his encyclical Testem Benevolentiae Nostrae to Cardinal James Gibbons. In 1898, Pope Leo XIII lamented an America where church and state are dissevered and divorced, and wrote of his preference for a closer relationship between the Catholic Church and the state along European lines. The long-term result was that the Irish Catholics, who largely controlled the Catholic Church in the United States, increasingly demonstrated their total loyalty to the Pope, and traces of liberal thought in the Catholic colleges were suppressed. At bottom it was a cultural conflict, as the continental conservative Europeans, angered at the heavy attacks on the Catholic Church in Germany, France and other countries, did not appreciate the active individualism, self-confidence, and optimism of the American Church. Americanism in Europe. During the French Third Republic, which began in 1870, the power and influence of French Catholicism steadily declined. The French government passed laws bearing more and more stringently on the Church, and the majority of French citizens did not object. Indeed, they began to look toward legislators and not to the clergy for guidance. Observing this, and encouraged by the action of Pope Leo XIII, who, in 1892, called on French Catholics loyally to accept the Republic, several young French priests set themselves to stop the decline in church power. They determined that because the Church was predominantly sympathetic to the monarchists and hostile to the Republic, and because it held itself aloof from modern philosophies and practices, people had turned away from it. The progressive priests believed that the Church did too little to cultivate individual character, and put too much emphasis on the routine side of religious observance. They also noted that Catholicism was not making much use of modern means of propaganda, such as social movements, the organization of clubs, or the establishing of settlements. In short, the Church had not adapted to modern needs, and these priests endeavored to correct this. They began a domestic apostolate which had for one of its rallying cries, Alonso Papal. They agitated for social and philanthropic projects, for a closer relationship between priests and parishioners, and for general cultivation of personal initiative, both in clergy and in laity. Not unnaturally, they looked for inspiration to America, that they saw a vigorous church among a free people, with priests publicly respected, and with a note of aggressive zeal in every project of Catholic enterprise. Isaac Hecker in the 1890s. This issue was brought forcefully to the attention of European Catholics by Comtesse de Ravillac's translation of a biography of Isaac Thomas Hecker by Paulist Father Walter Elliot, with the introduction by Abbé Felix Klein drawing the most high from the Vatican. His biography, written in English by the Paulist Father Elliot in 1891, was translated into French 6 years later and proved an inspiration to the French. Father Hecker had been dead for years at this point and had never been viewed by the Pope with disfavor. However, this translation of Hecker's biography and Abbé Klein's introduction to the book made him appear to have been much more of a radical than he in fact was. Hecker had sought to reach out to Protestant Americans by stressing certain points of Catholic teaching, but Pope Leo XIII understood this effort as a watering down of Catholic doctrine. Hecker also had used terms such as natural virtue, which to the Pope suggested the Pelagian heresy, because members of the Papists took promises but not the vows of religious orders. Many concluded that Hecker denied the need for external authority. The French liberals particularly admired Father Hecker for his love of modern times and modern liberty and his devotion to liberal Catholicism. Indeed, they took him as a kind of patron saint. Inspired by Father Hecker's life and character, the activist French priests undertook the task of persuading the fellow priests to accept the political system, and then to break out of their isolation, put themselves in touch with the intellectual life of the country, and take an active part in the work of social amelioration. In 1897, the movement received a new impetus when Monsignor O'Connell, former rector of the Pontifical North American College in Rome, spoke on behalf of Father Hecker's ideas at the Catholic Congress in Freiburg. Opposition to Americanism. Catholics who saw striking differences between the Church's treatment by adherents of classical liberalism took alarm at what they considered to be symptoms of pernicious modernism. In France, the conservatives were, almost to a man, anti-republicans who distrusted and disliked the democratic abbés. They complained to the Pope, and in 1898, Abbé Maignan wrote an ardent polemic against the new movement called Le Père Hecker, still unsaint. The European conservatives were reinforced by German-American Catholic bishops in the Midwest, who were distrustful of the Irish, who increasingly dominated the American Catholic Church. Arthur Prius, the foremost German Catholic theologian in the United States, was an outspoken enemy, filling his scholarly journal Fortnightly Review with attacks. Many powerful Vatican authorities also opposed the Americanist tendency, but Pope Leo XIII was reluctant to chastise the American Catholics, whom he had often praised for their loyalty and faith. In 1899 he wrote Cardinal Gibbons, "It is clear that those opinions that, taken as a whole, some designate as Americanism, cannot have our approval." Suppression of Americanism. In the encyclical Longan Quaesione, Pope Leo XIII indicated a generally positive view of the American Church, commenting mostly on the success of Catholicism in the U.S. but also noting the view that the Church would bring forth more abundant fruits if, in addition to liberty, she enjoyed the favor of the laws and the patronage of the public authority. Leo warned the American Church hierarchy not to support this unique system of separation of church and state. In 1898, Leo lamented an America where church and state are dissevered and divorced, and wrote of his preference for a closer relationship between the Catholic Church and the state, along European lines. Finally, in his encyclical Letter Testem Benevolentia Nostrae addressed to Cardinal James Gibbons, Archbishop of Baltimore, Leo condemned other forms of Americanism. Catholicism had long allowed nations to tolerate other religions, but the Church believes that the Catholic faith must be favored, to the exclusion of other religions, when possible. Pope Leo XIII also expressed concerns about the cultural liberalism of some American Catholics. He pointed out that the faithful could not decide doctrine for themselves. He emphasized that Catholics should obey the magisterial teaching authority of the Church, which, according to Catholic doctrine, can teach infallibly in matters of faith and morals. In general, he deemed it dangerous to expose children to schools that would prove to be detrimental to the Christian upbringing. The Pope derided the idea that all opinions should be aired publicly, as he felt certain speech could harm general morality. He also condemned the biography of Hecker and Americanism. This document condemned the following doctrines or tendencies: undue insistence on interior initiative in the spiritual life, as leading to disobedience, attacks on religious vows, and disparagement of the value of religious orders in the modern world, minimizing Catholic doctrine, minimizing the importance of spiritual direction. The brief did not assert that Hecker and the Americans had held any unsound doctrine on the above points. Instead, it merely stated that if such opinions did exist, the local hierarchy was to eradicate them. The American response to Testem Benevolentii, Cardinal Gibbons and many other American prelates replied to Rome with a near-unanimous voice, denying that American Catholics held any of the condemned views. They asserted that Hecker had never countenanced the slightest departure from Catholic principles in the fullest and most strict application. The disturbance caused by the condemnation was slight. Almost the entire laity and a considerable part of the clergy were unaware of this affair. However, the Pope's brief did end up strengthening the position of the conservatives in France. Leo's pronouncements effectively ended the Americanist movement and curtailed the activities of American progressive Catholics. Historian Thomas McAvoy argues there were grave long-term negative effects on the intellectual life of American Catholics. John Ireland, Archbishop of St. Paul, Minnesota and a foremost modernizer, had to walk on eggs to avoid condemnation for his views. Ireland sought to adapt the social and religious values of the Catholic Church to American political and cultural, especially religious liberty, separation of church and state, cooperation with non-Catholics, and lay participation in ecclesiastical decision-making. Many of his ideas were implicitly condemned by Pope Leo XIII's Testem Benevolentii as a heresy and Americanism. Nevertheless, Ireland continued to promote his views. When similar European views were condemned by Pope St. Pius X's Pascendi Dominici Gregis, Ireland actively campaigned against what the Pope declared the heresy of modernism. This apparently inconsistent behavior stemmed from Ireland's concept of a golden mean between ultra-conservatism, rendering the Church irrelevant, and ultra-liberalism, discarding the Church's message.